Welcome to the US-based news. In Russia, the ropes were broken. Wagner terrorist organization leader cut off all relations. Wagner withdraws from Ukrainian territory. The fate of the war changes completely. The war for the exhausted Russian army is almost over. Prigozhin's statement shocked the whole world. All the problems that Putin tried to hide broke out. The big Gene came to Ukraine for the big attack. From now on, every attack and operation will determine the fate of the war. Wagner's complete withdrawal will result in a complete sweep of the Russian army by the Ukrainian army. Putin is more worried than ever. Bakhmut began to come under the control of Ukraine. The operation held for months was in vain. The most critical day of the war is happening. The video released by the Wagner terrorist organization leader Prigozhin at night changed the world agenda. In my first video, we talked in detail about the withdrawal statements of the Wagner terrorist organization ringleader. Wagner is now withdrawing entirely from Ukrainian territory. Okay, now what? First of all, we know that the Great Ukrainian Offensive is approaching. The first major progress in this process will take place in Bakhmut. As you know, 80% of the enemy soldiers on the territory of Ukraine are members of the Wagner terrorist organization. In this process, I can say that the only reason the Russians carried out attacks for such a long time was the numerical superiority of the Wagner terrorist organization. In almost every video I mentioned, thousands of members of the Wagner terrorist organization were neutralized in the Bakhmut region. During this period, Russian propaganda continued unabated and many people tried to deny our statements. However, our statements are not published without being verified with reports and videos. Additionally, I think the missing numbers are still incompletely shared. Because the losses of the Russians are at least 5 times more. Since wars continue actively in many regions, the exact number of dead is not given. In addition, Wagner began to lose tens of thousands of wounded soldiers within 1 to 2 days as a result of the operations. In the process, the first major operations could begin in the Bakhmut and Kherson region. Prigozhin's statements may have changed Kiev's plans, because it seemed likely that the first attacks would be organized on the southern front. However, Wagner's withdrawal would cause the Russian army to lose 70% of its strength on all fronts. It looks like a big attack will start in this process. I can say that the complete rupture of relations between the Russians is a great opportunity for Ukraine. The exit of Yevgeny Prigozhin was the breaking point for Russia, which was stuck in Ukraine. While a counterattack is currently expected from the Ukrainian army, US intelligence states that Russia does not have a significant offensive force in 2023. Head of National Intelligence Avril Haines said in a speech to the Senate Armed Services Committee that Russia will not be able to carry out a major attack by the end of this year. According to the US Director of National Intelligence, who noted that the success or failure of Ukraine's counterattack will not change this situation, Moscow currently does not have soldiers or weapons trained for a serious attack. Saying that Russia will use all its might to hold the Ukrainian territory it is currently attacking, Haines sees the possibility of Putin using nuclear weapons very low. US-based military analyst Rob Lee said in a post on Twitter that this complaint was probably made for Russia to evenly distribute ammunition ahead of Ukraine's long-awaited counterattack. He added that the defense ministry must defend the entire front, but that Prigozhin's only concern is to get Bakhmut. Wagner's founder Prigozhin predicts that the Ukrainian counteroffensive will begin on May 15. Because tanks and artillery can move forward in dry air after a spring rain. It is believed that Prigozhin recruited an army general, who recently left the post of director of logistics. Colonel General Mikhail Mizintsev is known as the King of Mariupol, for his role in the bombing of the port city captured by Russian forces last year. Videos were shared from his visit to the Wagner training camp and Bakhmut. Prigozhin told Mizintsev that Wagner was offered the post of acting commander, that the general did his best to supply the Wagner mercenaries with ammunition, and that he cooperated in the group's efforts to recruit convicted prisoners into their ranks. Western intelligence agencies estimate that the Russian military has lost 220,000 soldiers in Ukraine in attacks, now in its 15th month. Most of the soldiers in question were neutralized, some wounded, and returned home. Russian leader Vladimir Putin declared the mobilization decision partial in September 2022, which he resisted for months, and with a few weeks of training, 300,000 reserve soldiers were sent to fight in Ukraine. Although Putin announced on the same date that they were illegally controlling 4 areas in Ukraine under attack, he had to withdraw Russian troops from Kherson 2 months later. Kherson, the only regional capital the Russians have captured, is located just north of the Crimean Peninsula. In recent weeks, Ukrainians have been carrying out drone attacks on oil facilities in Crimea, which Putin illegally captured in 2014. In the process, as the Battle of Bakhmut comes to an end, the Ukrainians will most likely try to deploy this enormous number of Russian troops east and prevent them from moving their forces south. One of these targeted attempts was the last limited attack, 40 kilometers northeast of Bakhmut. In April, when the Russians began digging trenches and sounding the alarm about a suspiciously large number of Ukrainian tanks near Siversk, the wave had already moved in that direction. The fiercest clashes take place between Bilohorivka and Zolotarivka. Bilohorivka is one of the largest Russian cemeteries for a year. In May last year, the Russians tried several times to cross the Seversky Donets River and attack this village. Each time, the Ukrainian artillery destroyed the Russian attack units, and after a month of effort, this direction was abandoned. Today the Russians are attacking from the south, not the north, but so far these efforts have also failed. Recently, Russian forces have shifted their thermobaric artillery systems in this direction, and have succeeded in capturing an isolated water pumping facility. At the same time, the Ukrainians try to undermine the Russian offensive efforts by attacking their positions near Zolotarivka. To this end, the Ukrainians moved their tanks in this direction and one after another began to break through the Russian positions. 2 weeks ago, the Ukrainian 54th Mechanized released a video showing how they attacked Russian positions under fire from anti-tank missiles in the forest areas 2.6 kilometers west of Zolotarivka. After successfully gaining control over all tree lines, the front advanced towards the toughest terrain and the most fortified Russian position, the Cyclops. The Ukrainians took time to prepare and conduct the storm in several stages. In the first stage, the Ukrainians staged a massive offensive to force the Russians to send reinforcements. When the drone operator noticed Russian forces moving, the Ukrainians left and focused on eliminating this group. In the second phase of the operation, the Ukrainians switched from mortar and grenade launchers to artillery and drone attacks. In the third phase of the operation, the Ukrainians entered the trenches without any hindrance and began to loot the bunker. It was impossible to attack the latter without casualties, and the Ukrainian troops decided to retreat, possibly using another tactic next time. In the face of such attacks, the Russians hastily began to build new fortifications in the direction of Lysychansk and strengthened the front. Since the Ukrainians are ahead, the probability of making a breakthrough here is very high. If this series of attacks is successful, the Ukrainians will either open the door to Soledar or from behind the Bakhmut group. This would put the Russians in an incredibly unfavorable position, as they would have to either leave Bakhmut or send more forces east to stabilize the situation. The ties between the Russian army and Wagner were completely severed. Tension reached record levels. We have come to the end of another video. We will continue to report the events in the coming hours to you quickly and accurately. We continue to inform you objectively about the events. You can like the videos to support us. You can also subscribe to the channel to make it easier to follow new videos. I wish you all happy days. See you later.